Welcome back. Segment number 2. I'm Jennifer Fierro, your Broad Podcaster here in the Highland Lakes with Art Dlugach, the voice of the Llano Yellow Jackets. And as promised, segment number 2 is going to start with the new hire by the Big 12 in terms of commissioner. This gentleman is going to replace Bob Bowlesby, who has been there for a decade. And his name is Brett Yormark. He is coming from Rock Nation Unified. Here's how I know Rock Nation Unified. It's Jay-Z's company. The same Jay-Z who's the rapper, married to the Queen Bee, Beyonce, and also is a part owner of the Brooklyn Nets. But for Brett, he is the co and the co-CEO of Rock Nation Unified. Now, here, before I hand it to Art to pass him the ball, if you will, to talk about give his thoughts on this hire, let me tell you what I think. The reason that I think that Brett is hired is not because he has a huge background in sports. It's because I believe that there is a changing landscape on how people are getting their sports news and watching their ball games. I think this guy was hired specifically to help the Big 12 navigate a huge upcoming contract with the TV network, specifically ESPN. I do know for a fact that ESPN has not wanted to negotiate a television contract with the Big 12, and yet they have been able to do that, I believe, with the SEC. And I want to say one of the networks has already finalized a deal with the Big 10. That may be Fox Sports. So right now, they've got to have the right leader in place. The Big 12 presidents have to have that in place in order for them to navigate through that. And as we know, right now the Big 12 is on par to have, starting in 23-24, 14 teams in the league. And that includes the 10 teams currently, plus Cincinnati, BYU, Houston, and Central Florida. But you said BYU is now scheduled to start the Big 12 plan to win?
Well, I'm not sure. The other three are coming over in 1 year, in 2023 July, and BYU could be very close to that.
Yeah, because they're an independent. I would anticipate they would come sooner rather than later if they can get out of those contracts. In my opinion, and I still believe this, I honestly believe that the top 60 college football teams in the country will form their own division and have their own college football playoff and their own national champion. Right now it's at 132. I think the top 60, 61 teams will leave. They'll form their own group, if you will, and they'll decide their own playoff and national champion. I think that will compel the TV networks to sign with these conferences and or schools in order to get them and entice them to do their own thing, and the Big 12 simply cannot be left behind. They are still part of the Power 5 group.
The networks and the big television guys, so that's where it will be interesting to see what Commissioner Yormark can do to alleviate that, and we'll just have to wait and see. But that's where a lot of people think the Big 12 will be hurt. Now, I think these teams coming in are quite good. Cincinnati, we saw that they got into the playoffs last year, the Final Four. I think Houston had a real good team. Central Florida, one of the Florida teams that's really coming up. And BYU has been a solid, above-average team for a number of years. So I like the conference. That will be, it will be 12 when Texas and Oklahoma leave, and we'll see how soon that is.
Yeah, Texas and Oklahoma are supposed to remain until the end of the 24-25 academic year. There is a big belief on the Texas side that Texas actually leaves for the SEC for the 24-25 academic year. So they'll get through this year and then the 23-24 academic year as Big 12 members, and then they'll be gone. That's by all indications from Texas officials. That's the timetable they're looking at. And I'll be honest with you, John Fields, the UT golf coach that we talked about in segment 1, talked about the ability to sell tickets, okay? Sell tickets. And he rattled off about 7 SEC teams off the top of his head without thinking about it. And he basically said, just those opponents alone will sell tickets in Austin. And when you see 100,000, and right now with improved, and I'm guilty of this because I'm very spoiled, I think the best place on the planet to watch a game live is in the press box. I've always thought that. So as somebody who has had to fight crowds to get to a seat at Texas Memorial Stadium, where you have to fight for a parking spot, you got to pay for a ticket, you got to pay for parking, you got to pay for $5 for bottled water, you got to pay for all sorts of things. I'm not in favor of that anymore when I've got a 72-inch big screen TV. There's no line to the bathroom. There's no line to the kitchen. You know, I can fill up a water cooler or a cooler of my favorite beverages and not have to pay extra for it. So, and I say that because Chris Del Conte pointed out technology is better. People get to a certain age, they don't want to fight the crowds anymore. So the Big 12 has to do something different. And Texas, in my opinion, had to do something different in order to get people to come out and watch the games live. That's why you have Bevo Boulevard and all of the other pregame festivities and postgame festivities, which for me are foreign, because to me the main event has always been the game.
Well, television, I'm going to disagree a little bit on this. Television is nothing new.
Correct.
We've been seeing college football games since the 1950s when I was a little boy. Now, all we got was one game a week. But certainly for the last, my goodness, 30 or 40 years, it's been awfully terrific to see sports events on television screens ranging at the time from, let's say, 30, 35 inches to now about 60 inches. So, sure, it's a great draw just to stay home. But all these schools face the same problem as Texas. I'm sure it's not easy to get to your seat, get a parking place in Tuscaloosa or Starkville, Mississippi, really State College, Mississippi, or in East Lansing, Michigan. It's all the same. These crowds are so huge. But they still seem to draw terrific crowds, including Texas. That was one reason I was a huge supporter of Mac Brown, because I thought he won a lot, would have been the all-time leading winner in Texas football history if he had stayed a couple more years. But even with that, he was drawing 100,000, 90,000 a game, and that was paying his $5 million salary. So those crowds are still there. Not only is it better to be watching TV than being there because of what you mentioned, but because of the fact those 4-minute commercials, when it's 90 to 100 degrees, is not easy to take, or in the Northeast or Midwest when it's 35 degrees.
Yeah, but here's the thing. You mentioned all of those schools in the SEC. The draw there is the game and who they're playing. Because I have heard Nick Saban complain, just like Mac Brown used to, that when Texas had a blowout and they were playing a lesser team and the game wasn't close, Texas fans left at halftime. It was hot. They were trying to beat the crowd out. Now, I'm here to tell you folks, I have been to a Texas game in the last 3 years. We have walked down Bevo Boulevard, enjoyed the festivities that come with it. If it's a great opponent, because I knew at that time, Texas, I think I watched the Oklahoma State game. Either Oklahoma State or Texas Tech. I forget which one now. But that was a fantastic game that came down to the wire where Texas had to make a defensive stand and then had to run the clock out. Texas is, to me, when you're playing an opponent that brings out your best, that is an easy ticket to sell. And people will stay for that. The Big 12 doesn't want to hear this, and this guy for sure doesn't want to hear this, but this is the truth. Texas has the biggest stadium in the Big 12 at 100,000. The next biggest is Oklahoma and then Texas Tech, and they are in the 80s to 90s. After that, everybody else has a 50 to 60,000 seat stadium. So he mentioned in the last segment, Texas and OU bring in the lion's share of the money, and that helps support the other 8 Big 12 teams. But the bottom line is that I think Texas and OU look at their bottom lines and they go, if we had better competition with a better home crowd where we could get 100,000 everywhere we go, we get more money.
Well, I'll say this about the competition. They certainly will get it in the SEC. If you want the money and you want to be in the #1 conference in the nation, the SEC is it. If you want a tough game every week, like A&M has faced in the last 10 years without ever getting to the SEC conference championship game, and I told them in 2011, don't leave, and they didn't listen to me, then fine. But if you want to win the majority of your games, as I think Texas people do, you have a better chance if you're playing Kansas or Kansas State, many years Baylor, and some of these other teams. So it's just your choice, I guess.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Texas and Oklahoma are leaving.
Yeah, well, don't bring up the Kansas right now. Kansas won
All right.
in 2021.
They did.
So, and Texas fans, believe me, I'm a diehard Texas fan. I don't want to hear that. But everything this guy said is absolutely right. I agree with everything he said, and he and I, this is one of the rare times that I think that he and I can agree, and it's a draw. I don't think anybody is wrong on this one. I really don't.
And I'll bet you a nickel. I don't want to say I'll bet everybody a nickel because I might lose too much. But I'll bet you a nickel that Texas reverses the winner-loser of the Kansas game this year and maybe in a number of years in the future. Well, they won't be playing in a number of years because they'll be in the SEC.
Well, let's see. Let's see. That's a discussion for another day. That's the end of segment number 2. We're going to go in and talk about recruiting in college football in the next segment. Lots to talk about there as well. I'm Jennifer Fierro, your broad podcaster with Art Dlugach, the voice of the Llano Yellow Jackets. And please make sure to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Please stay with us for segment number 3.